You first have to understand that your conventional world is ego, that you live in a fictitious self-created world. As long as you are in this world, you are in unreality. As long as you are in unreality, you cannot hear, see, or understand the supermental. You have to get out of unreality and find some place where supermental has become familiar and at least somewhat stabilized before you are ready for the supramental. All evolution is going towards supramental. Mind is just consciousness occasioned by ignorance. So we have to work through and understand all things of the mind. When you actually understand the nature of mind, then everything dissolves and there is no mind or consciousness. Then you see that intervention of the Absolute only has meaning for humans still caught in the world of illusion. It means nothing to a tree or a cat, because trees and cats are in some ways, even though they have distinct barriers of trunk and leaf and fur, are always moving in a continuum of the Absolute. They do not sit around cataloging or categorizing their experiences. They might have conditioned responses to external stimuli, but they do not sit around labeling occurrences or blaming their parents for their inadequacies. For example, if a cat called King bothers a cat called Lucy, Lucy does not sit around and categorize King or call him names. She just deals with it in the moment, and then continues about her business. The experience is just something that happened in the continuum of her reality, but she does not lose sleep over it. Humans are different. This is why they are the ones in need of a divine intervention. Humans are the species being tested. They are the ones who were allowed the development of ego and whom Satan was allowed to play with. When everyone is enlightened, there will be no intervention of the Absolute, because everything will be the intervention of the Absolute. At this point, we will all be functioning with ease like the animals and the plants. This is why so much emphasis is placed on overcoming duality. You can only overcome duality in a supramental state. Only in a supramental state can you receive the supramental knowledge. In a supramental state, you realize you are an extension of evolving consciousness and spirit. You do not categorize your experiences as a special thing that happened to you. Ultimately, there are no special things. However, there are different stages, levels, and categories of development of consciousness, spirit, and soul rising to the supramental. This is the second point. Any new dispensation or revelation of the Absolute intervention into history establishes a new lineage of transmission. The lineage is responsible for maintaining the conditions of the experience of the Absolute as the avatar, master, or teacher who received the new revelation or dispensation experienced it. All teachers affirm one principle, but because of the great division of the human race in time, geography, and culture, different teachers come to different peoples at different times, with teachings that appear to have different flavors. In other words, the earlier image of the waves rising and falling, followed by a stasis, then a need is called forth from the world soul. That need precipitates precisely the type of avatar required for a precise moment in time. That time may extend a long ways, both spatially and in duration, historically. For example, Buddha was precipitated precisely to conform to the moment in the relative history development of the world soul at a particular time. Christ was called forth according to the moment that was a reflection of the world soul at his particular time. Muhammad was called forth in a particular way to conform to the need of the world soul of his time. Even though the root teachings have some kind of common base, the teachings evolve in different psychocultural ways. Because of this, each of the teachings takes on different qualities, characteristics, and cultural colorings, so they appear increasingly different. Within those waves, people split hairs and makes even more differences, so that when the wave crashes, instead of being a wave, it is just a lot of froth and bubbles that come crashing down. Muhammad was the only messenger to leave behind a book, the Holy Quran, the recitation of God, that confirms all true teachings. After him, Guru Nanak, founder of the Sikh religion, left a book, but no one knows about it like they know about the Quran. Then there are different levels of teachers. Because of the nature of civilization, it is necessary to have super manifestations of the intervention of the Absolute in history. You have to have huge world-renewing teachers or teachings that appear great avatars. Sri Ramakrishna had by now practiced all the different phases of devotion. His spiritual experience hitherto gathered had many forms. Sometimes he willed himself into them, but other times the strong courage of his spiritual nature swept him into them in spite of himself. He would commune with invisible beings, forms of divinity or divine incarnations of the past. Such visions, however, belong to the domain of personality, which is not the last word of spiritual experiences. He was yet to reach a state where knowledge, knower, and known become one individual consciousness, a state in which space disappears into nothingness. Time is swallowed up in eternity and causation becomes a dream of the past. He only knows the state who has experienced it. It is all stillness, undefinable. The soul, after a final struggle, leaps over a last barrier of relative existence, shatters its prison of matter and merges in the infinite glory of Brahman. This is called the Nirvikalpa Samadhi, the highest flight of Advaita, non-dualist philosophy. This is the crowning glory of man's spiritual exercise, the last word in his evolution. Then there is no more birth, no more death, nor any further identification with the changes of the body. He leaves behind all the modifications of relativity like a cast-off garment. He realizes his identity with the eternal Brahman, the one without a second. There is no doubt Sri Ramakrishna was the fittest person to realize this state. The field was ready, plowed, and waited only for the sowing of the seed. Chapter 8 of the Short Life of Ramakrishna, pages 54 and 55. This is just to give an example of spiritual precipitation. Sri Aurobindo felt the call of the Absolute, and then, because he had that precipitation, finally there was a complete condensation of the Absolute within him. The reign of the Absolute kept happening to him through his life, until finally the Absolute condensed in him. The question is, were not Ramakrishna and Sri Aurobindo avatars exemplifying a universal process that all humans must undergo? From a relatively early age, Ramakrishna slipped effortlessly into trances. Most people thought he was crazy, god-mad, or possessed, talking to sculptures or other inanimate objects. Ultimately, he went right to the Absolute, the Supreme, the One, the Brahman.